My name is Christopher Gallant. Today I'd like to talk about labor practices in the developing world. This video is for Dave Tofanelli's Communications for Managers ADEP course at California Lutheran University. U.S. companies are exploiting child labor in underdeveloped countries. In doing so, they not only take jobs away from people in the United States, they also bring terrible conditions to people living in the Third World. More than simply impacting the U.S. labor market, U.S. companies severely impact generations of people living in Latin America. Their operations pull children from schools as soon as they're old enough to operate the equipment. The children must work to support their families due to increasing costs of living, depriving them of the education they would need to get out of the cycle of poverty. With no chance to improve their situation, they're trapped into working low-wage jobs in foreign-owned factories, the only life they know. It's a brutal cycle that serves only the companies. Another element keeping people working at the plants is called debt bondage. Workers are often charged high rates for food, transportation, housing, etc. As they work to pay it off, the charges for basic subsistence are higher than their wages. They aren't permitted to leave until they've paid their debt, an impossible task at that rate. The prices are high in American villages in Central American villages also, in part because of the household income having been driven up by local manufacturers. Foreign firms have established company stores in many of these areas, keeping the prices high and extracting the majority of the money the workers have been paid. Adding to their plight, American manufacturers and agribusiness controls much of the arable land. Land remaining in the hands of the indigenous population is used to produce agricultural products that will often be exported out of the country, thanks in part to trade restrictions having been lifted under NAFTA. The problem is that companies are allowed to wreak havoc on the people of underdeveloped nations with no real oversight. If the United States actively stopped allowing companies to operate within its borders while engaging in unethical and often illegal behavior, there would finally be incentive to operate in a way that's not antithetical to American principles. As long as it's profitable and acceptable to engage in these practices abroad, companies will continue to do so. The first option is to use legislation to ban this sort of behavior by American companies. Our government can require those companies wishing to sell goods in the U.S. must do so under conditions that are not in conflict with American values. Unfortunately, ideals don't contribute to political campaigns. While many people in the United States may feel strongly about the issue, they lack the political clout and resources of many major corporations that would be affected by such legislation. The chance of passing legislation that might even remotely be construed as anti-business is also slim to non-existent. Even legislation designed to help the American worker here at home is often met with stiff resistance. Additionally, there is the issue of oversight over operations in foreign countries without threatening those countries' sovereignty. The actions of the United Fruit Company and the CIA in the 1950s have strongly affected the opinions of people in Latin America about the U.S. desire to help them without conquering. In the global information age, educational campaigns directed at American consumers could be used to discourage purchasing goods made by companies engaged in unethical practices. One example of this was demonstrated in the case study. Historically, though, cheap goods have more sway over American consumers than appeals to ethics. One need only look at the success of Walmart to prove that point. Buy American campaigns have met with limited success as evidenced by the steady decline of American manufacturing in the last 30 years. There are also fewer alternatives for American consumers to purchase, and the origin of clothes is not always clear. While companies like Bill's Khakis and American Apparel make their goods here, other American icons like Levi Strauss and Brooks Brothers do not, in direct conflict with those companies' marketing efforts to make them appear to be all American. The option also exists for political efforts in the affected countries. Human rights groups can and have petitioned governments to properly oversee labor within developing nations. While there is value in helping countries to change from within, the governments are often fearful of losing tax revenue from companies operating within their borders. They're also rightfully leery of fomenting civil unrest in regions that have experienced much turmoil already. Central America was beset by civil wars and military coups during the 20th century, and any measure of stability is to be cautiously guarded. Workers who are subjugated by multinational corporations don't have to be subjugated by the nations themselves, minimizing the risk of violent revolution. It's also possible to draw on the early American labor movement's efforts to bring about fair labor practices in the United States. While the situation in the United States at the start of the 20th century is not entirely analogous to that of Nicaragua or El Salvador today, there are lessons to be learned from those early organizers. Efforts to organize labor in the developing world have been undertaken with mixed success. Labor organizers have brought together workers in Central America, the Philippines, and Southeast Asia. They've worked to teach locals how to organize effectively while empowering them to bring change from within. Unfortunately, organizing workers is neither fast nor without risk to those involved. It can take years to organize a single facility. Those involved can also face unemployment, hardship, and even violence. Ultimately, organizing labor within the affected countries may be the only way to make progress. It's not fast or a sure thing, but the people have to learn to do for themselves and develop the skills to make sure those changes stick. The exploitation will continue until the people are able to stop it where it exists. The people have a fundamental right to choose their own destiny. By giving them the skills and knowledge to carve out that destiny, we can also bring them together as citizens. As Thomas Jefferson once said, "Enlighten the people generally, and tyranny and oppressions of body and mind will vanish like evil spirits at the dawn of day."